Step into the abyss and welcome to Weird Encounters, a place where the ordinary fades into shadow and the unexplainable comes alive. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and join our ever-growing community of the curious. Your support is the lifeblood that keeps this channel alive. Now, prepare yourself, for what you're about to witness is not for the faint of heart. This story comes to us from a nice couple in Vermont. Rolling hills, quiet nights, and a sleepy little goat farm. Peaceful, right? Well, not this night. Because on this particular evening, something was out there, lurking, watching. Not a person, not something you could call human at all. Shapes that didn't belong. A presence that made the hair on their necks stand on end. My wife and I have a small goat farm in Vermont. We're still new to farming, and we've kept things pretty simple. On the side, we even make goat milk soap to bring in a bit of extra money. Life's peaceful here, usually. Last night, though, was something else. Around 9:30 p.m., we heard this strange, chilling noise from the barn. At first, I thought one of the goats had escaped. The sound wasn't normal, though. I grabbed my flashlight, and my wife followed me out into the freezing night. The barn's outdoor light wasn't much help. Inside, the goats were huddled together, bleating nervously in one corner. When I shone my flashlight around, I saw it. A strange creature crouched by the hay bales. It wasn't a raccoon or a coyote. It looked like a small, black-haired animal with long limbs and glowing eyes. Its face reminded me of a baboon's. It was eating the hay, but it didn't seem aggressive, just out of place. We tried yelling and banging broom handles to scare it off, but it didn't budge. Eventually, we decided to get better dressed. Thin jackets weren't cutting it in the snow, and head back. Before we could decide what to do next, the creature leaped out of the barn and vanished into the dark. The next morning, we checked everything. The barn was secure, and the goats were fine. We figured it was a one-time thing. But when night fell again, so did the unease. Around the same time, we heard it. That same eerie scream and the sound of something thudding against the barn walls. We rushed back out, better prepared this time. A window on the barn was swinging open, though we'd closed it tightly before. Inside, the goats were restless again. And there, perched high on a hay bale, was the creature. It was just sitting there, staring at us. Its red eyes reflected in the flashlight beam, unblinking. My wife whispered, "What does it want?" I didn't have an answer. Then I remembered the bin of overripe apples near the door. I grabbed one and tossed it towards the creature. To my surprise, it caught the apple midair and started eating. We kept tossing apples, and it kept eating, moving closer but never threatening us. Just as we started to relax, the creature stopped chewing and looked past us, toward the woods. We turned, and in the shadows, we saw movement. More of them. There were at least 3 shapes, shifting silently at the edge of the trees. My stomach sank. The creature we'd been feeding made a series of noises, and the others disappeared into the darkness. Then it looked back at us one last time before following them. The next morning, we found tracks everywhere around the barn. They didn't match anything we'd seen before. We added extra locks to the barn and have been keeping a closer watch ever since. We haven't seen the creatures again, but on quiet nights, when the wind carries the right sound, we hear those strange calls from the woods. It's a mystery we've learned to live with. Unsettling, but part of life here now. We give them space, and they seem to respect ours. That's our story. Thanks for listening. That night started like any other. After dinner, I went out for my usual walk. I've always found walking helps clear my head, especially after a tough day. Work had been stressful, and I needed to get away from my thoughts for a while. The streets were quiet, and before I knew it, I had wandered to the far edge of town. This part of town always feels different. The houses are farther apart, the yards are overgrown, and some of the streetlights don't work. It feels like the edge of something, like the last stop before nowhere. There's one house there that everyone knows. It's been empty for years. The windows are boarded up, the paint is peeling, and the garden looks more like a jungle. People always whisper about it, saying it's haunted or cursed. I never paid attention to those stories. Kids make up stuff all the time. But that night, something about the house caught my attention. The gate hung loosely, barely attached to its hinges. When I pushed it open, it let out this long, loud squeak, the kind you hear in scary movies. I couldn't help but laugh to myself. Guess I'm the main character in a ghost story now, I thought. The path leading to the house was cracked and covered in weeds. My sneakers crunched on gravel and dried leaves as I walked toward the door. The house looked even bigger up close, its dark shape towering against the night sky. Then I noticed the door. It was open. Not wide open, but just enough to notice. It felt strange. Why would the door be open in an abandoned house? I should have turned around right there, but I didn't. Instead, I stepped inside. The air was different inside, was coated in dust, and the wallpaper was peeling in long strips, curling at the edges. The smell was the worst, damp and moldy, mixed with something else, like decay. I wandered through the rooms on the ground floor. There wasn't much left, just some old furniture and broken things scattered around. It was sad, really. You could imagine what it might have looked like a long time ago when people lived here. Now it was just empty, forgotten. Then I heard it, a sound from below. It was faint, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. My first thought was animals. Maybe a raccoon or a stray cat had gotten inside. But the sound didn't fit. It was too slow, too steady. I should have left right then, but curiosity got the better of me. It always does. I found the door to the basement and opened it. The stairs creaked as I stepped down, each one groaning like it was warning me to turn back. And then I saw them. Eyes. 2 eyes reflecting the light from my flashlight. They were too bright, too sharp, staring right at me. At first, I thought it might be a cat, but then it moved, stepping forward into the light. My heart froze. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. The thing was tall but hunched, with limbs that were too long and bent in ways that didn't make sense. Its skin was dark, almost like it wasn't there at all, blending into the shadows around it. The way it moved was worse than how it looked. It was silent, sliding through the air like it was part of the darkness. Its eyes stayed locked on me the whole time, unblinking, cold, and too knowing. I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my flashlight trembling in my hand. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't listen. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the thing was gone. It slipped back into the shadows, disappearing as if it had never been there. That was enough to snap me out of it. My legs finally worked, and I ran. I bolted up the stairs, out of the house, and down the overgrown path. My chest burned, and my heart pounded in my ears, but I didn't stop. I didn't slow down until I was back under the glow of the streetlights. Even then, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see those glowing eyes staring back at me from the dark. But the street was empty, silent, except for the sound of my footsteps and my gasping breath. I haven't gone back to that house. I can't even bring myself to walk on that side of town anymore. And the scariest part? I don't think it was just watching me. I think it wanted me to see it. The parking lot was dark and silent. My breath fogged in the cold night air as I made my way to the dumpster. I'd been asked to take the trash out after work, and I wasn't thrilled about it. The lot always felt eerie at night, but this time, something was different. As I approached the dumpster, a strange noise made me freeze. It wasn't the wind or the usual rustling sounds of garbage settling. This was deeper, rougher, like something heavy moving around. My pulse quickened. That's when I saw it. The creature was hunched over the dumpster, its claws scraping along the metal edge as it rummaged through the trash. It was bigger than any dog I'd ever seen and covered in coarse fur. Its limbs were long and wiry, and its movements were jerky, almost unnatural. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing: I didn't want it to see me. Slowly, I backed up, but the sound of my boots gave me away. The creature's head snapped up. Two eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. It snarled, revealing sharp teeth, and I realized I was in trouble. Without thinking, I grabbed the ice scraper from my pocket. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. I held it in front of me like a sword, hoping the creature would see it as a threat and back off. It didn't. Instead, it let out a guttural growl and charged straight at me. Panic surged through me as I turned and sprinted for my car. The sound of its claws scraping against the pavement was terrifyingly close. I barely reached the driver's side door in time. As I threw myself inside, the creature's shoulder slammed into the car, forcing the door shut behind me. I locked the doors, my hands trembling. The creature wasn't giving up. It scratched at the windows, its claws making horrible screeching sounds as it tried to get in. I pressed myself back into the seat. I couldn't believe the glass was holding up. From the safety of the car, I stared at the beast. It was feral, wild, and relentless. My mind raced with questions. What was it? Why was it here? I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911. My voice was shaky as I explained what was happening, but I didn't have time to care. All I could do was pray that help would come before the creature found a way in. Minutes felt like hours. Then, suddenly, the creature stopped. It stared at me through the window, its glowing eyes full of something I couldn't quite read. Anger? Hunger? Then it turned and melted into the shadows, disappearing as if it had never been there. I didn't dare move. Not until I saw the flashing red and blue lights of the police cars filling the lot. Relief washed over me as I stepped out of the car and explained what had happened. But that relief was short-lived. The officers didn't believe me. They exchanged skeptical glances as I described the creature, and one even smirked. They accused me of making it all up, wasting their time. Frustration bubbled inside me. Why would I call them out here in the freezing cold for a prank? I showed them the dumpster, pointing out the scratches on the metal and a tuft of fur the creature had left behind. But they dismissed it, saying it could have been from a raccoon or some other animal. Still, I refused to give up. I asked to speak to a supervisor, hoping they'd take me seriously. Instead, they brushed me off even faster than the officers, their tone sharper. It was clear they thought I was either lying or imagining things. As I walked back to my car, anger and confusion swirled inside me. I couldn't be the only one who'd seen something like this. The creature had known how to open the dumpster. That meant it had done it before, probably somewhere else. I imagined someone finding it near their home, maybe digging through their trash late at night. Did the police just ignore those reports too? Were they trying to keep people from panicking? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. Next time, I wouldn't call the police. I'd call animal control instead. Since that night, I've avoided being outside alone after dark, especially near the dumpsters. Just walking through the parking lot makes me uneasy, even with music blasting through my headphones. Work hasn't been the same either. I stick to indoor tasks whenever I can. The thought of that creature coming back is always in the back of my mind. And honestly, I think it will. One day, it'll return, and when it does, I'll be ready. But don't expect me to go looking for it. My name is Clara, and this is the story of how my life changed forever. It's not easy to talk about, but I feel like I must share it so others can learn from my experience. It all began when I traveled to my aunt's old house in rural Pennsylvania. She had passed away, and as the executor of her will, it was my job to go through her belongings. Her house was over 100 years old, built around 1900, and sat on a sprawling property. The land used to host multiple houses and barns, but time had worn them down. Only stone chimneys and scattered wells remained, reminders of what once was. That day, I was overwhelmed. The house felt heavy with memories, and sorting through her things was more than I could handle. To clear my mind, I stepped outside and wandered across the fields. The fresh air helped at first, but then I heard something, a terrible, ear-piercing screech coming from the east. It startled a flock of crows into the sky as I tried to locate the source of the sound. In the distance, I spotted an old well made of crumbling fieldstone. Curious and unaware of what lay ahead, I walked toward it. As I approached, a strong sulfuric smell filled the air. I thought it was just gases escaping from the ground. But when I peered over the edge, I saw something that froze me in place. 15 feet down, perched on a piece of broken wood lodged in the well's walls, was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. Its head looked like a horse's skull, but its body resembled a small dragon, complete with black folded wings. Sharp talons gripped the timber as it tore into a bird, maybe a hawk, ripping its flesh while the poor animal twitched in its grasp. My stomach turned at the sight, but it was the creature's eyes that truly terrified me. They glowed like red-hot embers, full of malice and hatred. The creature looked up and locked eyes with me as I stumbled backward. Fear gripped me so tightly I could barely move. Instinctively, I clutched the small cross around my neck and whispered a prayer. Suddenly, the creature let out a deep hiss, and I heard the sound of wings unfurling. It was coming after me. I turned and ran, my legs barely carrying me toward the safety of the farmhouse. I could hear its wings slicing through the air, feel the rush of wind as it swooped close. My heart pounded as I reached the porch, flung the door open, and slammed it shut behind me. I thought I was safe, but then I remembered the back door. I had left it open, with only the screen door in place. Panicking, I sprinted through the house and bolted the back door just in time. I peered out the windows but saw no sign of the creature. Was it gone, or was it waiting for me to slip up? I returned to the living room, which faced the well, and dropped to my knees. I prayed, thanking God for protecting me and promising to change my ways if He would keep me safe. That's when I heard it, a scratching sound. My prayers faltered as I tried to locate the noise. It was faint but growing louder, closer. The sound was coming from the chimney. I realized with horror that the creature was trying to get inside the house. My aunt's old farmhouse had a large chimney, wide enough for something that size to squeeze through. The scratching grew louder as it descended, and I knew I had only moments before it emerged in the fireplace. Grabbing my car keys and purse, I ran for the front door. My hands shook as I fumbled with the latch, but I managed to fling it open and dart outside. I didn't dare look back. I jumped into my car, started the engine, and sped away, my lips moving in prayer. Even when I was miles down the road, I couldn't stop trembling. Eventually, I pulled over and called a friend who was deeply religious. Together, we prayed over the phone as I drove back to town. By the time I reached home, I felt a strange calm. I knew I had been given a second chance, a warning. That creature, whatever it was, showed me the darkness that exists in the world and the consequences of straying too far from the light. I believe it was a sign to turn my life around, to repent for my mistakes, and to follow a better path. I'm sharing my story from a quiet town in upstate New York. Over the last few months, I've experienced some strange and unsettling events that I believe are worth telling. I work as a gardener, often tending to the large estates of wealthy families. These jobs tend to last for years, and I've grown used to the rhythms of the work. My last position lasted 8 years, but when my employer moved away and sold the property, I found myself without a job. For months, no one was hiring. When I finally got a new position at a sprawling estate in the middle of nowhere, I felt incredibly lucky. The estate belonged to a young couple, the Irvings, who were in their early 30s. The property had been in Mr. Irving's family for generations, though it was clear it had seen better days. It wasn't near any major attractions or the coast, so renting it out wasn't an option. The only ones living there were the Irvings and a small staff, including me and another gardener, Jeff. Right away, I noticed there weren't enough workers for a property this size. The gardens alone needed at least 5 people for proper maintenance, but there were just the 2 of us. Still, I ignored the warning signs. I needed the job too much to be picky. The estate was a mess when I started in the fall. The gardens were overrun with dead trees and weeds. It looked like no one had tended to the place in years. The main house wasn't much better. Some rooms appeared abandoned, covered in dust and cobwebs. Only the staff quarters and a few rooms in the main house were still in good shape. Curious about the estate's condition, I asked the chef, who had been working there the longest. He said the house had always been the family's main home. Things only started falling apart about 6 months before I arrived. Most of the staff assumed the Irvings were running out of money. It was the simplest explanation, so I didn't question it. That changed one night when I stayed late in the garden. I was working near the edge of the forest, trying to finish building some planting beds before the weekend. My flashlight died suddenly, plunging the area into near darkness. As I packed up to head back to the house, I felt something icy cold press down on my shoulder. A shiver ran through me, and then I heard footsteps walking away toward the mansion. The strange thing was, I could see the path clearly thanks to the moonlight and the lights from the house. No one else was there. I rushed back to the staff quarters, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew something unusual had happened. Over the next few weeks, the experiences continued. It always followed the same pattern. A nearby light would flicker or go out completely. Then, I'd feel a touch, sometimes on my shoulder, other times a nudge at my elbow. Next came the blast of cold air, so frigid it felt like winter had suddenly arrived. I started keeping a journal to document these encounters, hoping to make sense of them. Eventually, I asked Jeff if he had experienced anything strange. At first he laughed it off, but later, he admitted he'd felt the same eerie presence. One night, while we were working together in the garden, it happened again. This time, Jeff felt it too. It wasn't just me. We decided to quietly ask the other staff members. To our surprise, 2 housekeepers and the chef had also experienced the strange touches and freezing cold air. No one had spoken up before because they were afraid of being ridiculed. From that point on, we started working in pairs to avoid being alone. While the presence hadn't harmed anyone, we didn't want to take any chances. The work slowed down, but the Irvings didn't seem to notice or care. One of the housekeepers found another job and left the estate. The rest of us stayed because we didn't have many options. The presence, whatever it was, seemed harmless for now. But Jeff was convinced it was only a matter of time before things escalated. As for me, I'm planning to leave before the new year. The garden's beauty isn't worth the constant feeling of unease. If the presence becomes more aggressive, I'll be sure to let someone know. For now, we're just trying to make it through each day without letting fear get the better of us. I can't say what's behind these strange occurrences. Maybe it's a restless spirit tied to the house, or maybe there's another explanation entirely. All I know is, this is one job I'll be glad to leave behind.